Hello, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're connected from. Hola, muy buenas tardes, muy buenas noches. Mi nombre es Andrés Pineda y es para mí un placer estar con ustedes la noche de hoy en un episodio más de .NET Dominicana. Si es la primera vez que te conectas con nosotros, nosotros somos .NET Dominicana. We are the .NET community behind in Dominican Republic. We bring presentations every month to talk about Microsoft technologies. Tecnologías, Microsoft, aquí se habla de todo lo que tiene que ver alrededor de Microsoft. O sea, no solamente hablamos de código, hablamos de base de datos, hablamos de cloud, hablamos de Azure, hablamos de Docker. Eh, toda esa tecnología que ustedes van a necesitar para ser desarrolladores y que están alrededor del mundo Microsoft, aquí lo hablamos. El día de hoy la charla será en inglés. Our presentation tonight is in English, so I can probably switch just English and from here on. It's a very good. The guest for tonight is someone that I really appreciate a lot, a lot. I owe a lot to that person. But before bringing the speakers to the room, I just want to say thank you to our sponsors, because our sponsors are the one that make this possible. So our sponsor for today is JetBrain and Writer, the IDE that brings superpowers to your development cycle. So make you a 10x developer easily, just because of it provides the tools and the things that you need to make you more productive. Funny is that I use Writer because of the speakers that is coming tonight. No, I'm not going to wait more time. Rodney, good evening. How are you doing today, man?
Andres, I am doing fantastic. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. Thank you for the introduction. I mean, man, like, it's funny because you say you owe a lot to me, but like I owe some to you. And I still remember the first time we met each other, and it was like, oh wow, that's him, like both of us. So
Yeah.
I'm very grateful to be here and to be giving you some information tonight.
Yeah, and I've made this story of you a couple of times in the past. Like, for me, getting into open source, everyone at some point in their career, they want to collaborate and bring back to that community. And the first time that I collaborated in an open source project was ReactiveUI, which is one of the tools, technologies that I love, and you were one of the maintainers there.
Yep. Yeah. It feels like ancient history now, but yeah, that's exactly how it all got started.
Yeah, and I just need it, and that's why it's so important having support. Because all I needed was one pull request. All I needed was one person that seated with me and guided me through the process to clone a repository, find issues, compile it, and create your first pull request. After that, I've been very active on the .NET and the open source community, not only in .NET, but on the open source community overall. So that's why I say I owe that to you, and appreciate it. Thank you very much, Rodney, for everything you've done, not only for me, everything you've done for the community.
My pleasure. Like I say, when I got involved in open source, it was very much the same thing. One of my friends told me, get involved in open source, and I had no idea what it was. And then I realized that open source provided me the playground to learn outside of work. I got to work on fun problems, things that, I didn't have PMs and testers breathing down my neck for deliverables and requirements, and none of that mattered in the open source community. Only thing that mattered in the open source community was that I wanted to help.
Yeah.
And people were willing to take just that. And if you couldn't get it 100% of the way, they'd help you get it to 100%. So, I once I saw that was what the community was about, I jumped in head on.
Yeah, and you mentioned something important that I try to everyone that I mentor or I have the opportunity to instruct is that sometimes in your day-to-day work you're looking for this shiny technology, or this I'm not doing crazy nice stuff because I'm doing crowd applications, but I want to do. So you see people in that battle, and people change job just because they're looking for working in something exciting.
Mm-hmm.
I tell people, do not change your job only because you're not doing something exciting. You want to do something exciting, go do it yourself or go collaborate in an open source project where there's a lot of exciting projects out there. I say shiny, and that's a very nice project as well,
It is.
from one of our colleagues, right?
Yeah.
Um, so use this. Open source is there. There's a lot of people right now and maintainers looking for help. If you're listening to this presentation and you're one of the person that you want 2025 to be the year that you started collaborating to open source, come to me, go to Rodney. We may gonna make sure that you find some place that are requiring for help and they are exciting uh, things to do.
Definitely.
I see Lester say hi. Early this morning,
Hey,
we were
Lester.
talking. He's on the chat. He's online already.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lester, we were talking about you a couple of minutes ago.
Yeah.
We came to the conversation. So Ronnie, talking about nullability.
Yeah.
What was the inspiration for this presentation?
Oh, so it's in the slide deck, and I'll show it in a minute. But basically, so a couple years ago, C#8. So I think we're on 13 now, but C# language version 8 introduced nullable reference types. And I had the good luck of drawing the short straw and enabling it for ReactiveUI. And it was a very grueling process. Like I was digging through code, didn't understand what the feature was, how to take advantage of the feature. And it really was a very big slog. So then I've got I've got lots of projects that now use C#8 and above, and I've turned it on for a couple of other libraries, and I've turned it on for some code bases, some legacy code bases I used to work on, as well as where I am currently working. And I was sitting there one day looking at a pull request, and I was reviewing a pull request, and I realized that the developer that wrote the code didn't understand C#, didn't understand nullability. Like didn't understand the concept of encapsulating null, not making the entire rest of the system verify all that's like, it was like, it didn't matter. I use the question mark dot operator and I run and I'm good, right? Like that's the feature. And,
Exactly.
and I got so frustrated. So there was one pull request that happened and then another and then another. And after, a gentleman who I've met several times, Scott Hanselman, told me if you say the same thing, if you're repeating yourself, if you say it 3 more times, write a blog post. So I wrote a blog post, and then I was like, you know what? Maybe I should do a talk on it. And people were like, yeah, Rodney, do a talk on it. So I was like, okay, fine. Throw some slides together and make some jokes.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So that was an advance of the presentation. I'm sorry that I made you bring that topic before you talk, but I'm gonna remove myself from the stage, and I'm gonna leave the stage for you, folks. You're listening this online, you have the opportunity to ask questions. So use the chat box. Anything that you listen that you say, oh, I don't understand what Ronnie is saying, ask the question, and we're going to make sure that your questions are answered before finishing. If you then listening to this presentation recorded, then you will be able to ask questions but later on Twitter, Blue Sky, or wherever you are located right now. Exactly. So Rodney, I leave the stage to you. I'm going to be on the backstage listening and learning.
Thank you. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So I see that there's a question already. So I'll go ahead and start off by saying I'm very interactive. So ask the questions, Andres, interrupt me. Do not hesitate. Like I prefer this to be an interactive session because it's a very interesting to me topic, but it's a very kind of glossed over topic. So I see there's already a question in here and says that somebody said they joined. I think they said they joined and they already have questions. They said that they thought that null is a reference to a memory address, and that would be 0000000 in binary. I think there was enough zeros. So let me go ahead and state that, yeah, that is correct. I don't think C# does anything different from that perspective, but that's kind of what we're going to talk about. Not necessarily. So it's called C# nullable reference types. We are going to talk about null, but we're going to talk more about what C# did to make null a first-class citizen in the language for developers to use. I'm going to try and make jokes. The last time I did this presentation, like it was in a room full folks, and they were making jokes. So we'll see how this goes. Clicking buttons. So as you can see, this is me. You can find me at all of those places on the internet. There's a QR code there. I think that works, and it'll get you to everything. But that's how you can find me. If you have any questions later, or you just want to tell me, hey, Rodney, that was horrible, you're wrong about everything, reach out. Let's talk. So this is the tweet that started this talk. I legitimately just asked the public internet, like who cares? Like, who wants to hear about this? Because, I would think that no one really wants to hear about nothing for an hour, right? like who wants to sit and listen to a guy talk about a memory address for an hour? Nobody. But the internet said otherwise, and my own experiences were leaning me towards the concept of giving this talk. So I figured I'd go ahead and put something together. So again, to give you an understanding, this is a talk about nothing. We're gonna get into nullability. What I've learned during my time implementing nullability in several large code bases. I've done it at this point for, I think, 2, maybe 3 different open source projects, as well as my own projects and the various clients that I have. So all of that is like, all that learning is going to kind of come out in this conversation. So what does it actually mean to be null? So we throw around this term and we say, oh, well, that we say this equals null, and we check, say, if this equals null, and we use this this question mark dot operator, and we really don't understand the question or really what it is that we're doing with it. Like, I see people return null from methods, and it's just like, that's a bomb in your code waiting to go off. But everyone's understanding of null is different, because we've all come from different languages. We all have probably, some of us have gone through university and we've seen different languages there, handle it differently. There are even languages that don't support it, like don't support null at all, which is weird. So it's really a question of, like, what does it mean to be null? And we need to really grasp that concept. So null is really the absence of a thing. And this is where the jokes are going to start. This is legitimately my favorite internet meme for this, because it points out in very crass terms, the difference between having 0 of something and null. And I feel like a lot of times developers think that 0 and null are interchangeable, but they're really not. Tony Hoare called this his $1 billion mistake. And I'd say that with inflation, we are well into the $10 billion at this point. But basically, null, the absence of a thing, ends up or results in a null reference exception, right? Or an argument null exception, where we try and access something. Yeah, Lester, that's exactly it. You can only stand so many NREs in your software. Right? This is what it comes down to. This is not specific to C#, right? Like, there's nothing specific about null to C#. And again, some languages like F#, it doesn't, like, null is not even a thing unless you're doing like C# interop, and then you have to deal with null. But F# as a language just doesn't support null. Like, null is not a thing. You can't have something be null. It either is or isn't, but it can't be the absence of is or isn't, right? So it gets kind of weird. So nullability was always there, right? So this is where we get into the title of the talk is nullable reference types. Nullability was always in our software, right? Like, it was always there. C# just didn't put it in your face. With the advent of Roslyn, the DNU, the DNX, and eventually .NET Core and the current modern day .NET, right? Like, we have evolved from the place of null is something that we only know about when an NRE, a null reference exception, gets triggered on our code, to something that we can pay attention to at compile time, right? So that's like the real big difference, right? It's like nullability was there. It was just this looming shadow down in the basement of your code that was just waiting for its opportunity to just kick your software over and make you look bad to your customers, right? Like, that's what null has been all the way up until C# 8. And when C# 8 came along, we got the advent of Roslyn, right? So, well, sorry, Roslyn was there. C# 8 brought Roslyn support for nullability, to be specific. And now you can do compile time checks for null. So that means that instead of waiting for your software to throw the random null reference exception in production, you can catch the null reference exception at compile time, because types now understand a reference to null. So going back to the point someone made earlier about null is just a memory address, right? The problem is that C# didn't have a way to typify null. So you couldn't have a object of type thing and it know the null state of that object of type thing. So that's kind of what the Roslyn compilation bits brought. And because it's compile time, now we have the entirety of the Roslyn framework, the entirety of the goodness of what Roslyn brings to the table, and we can now introspect our code and solve these problems long before they cause system-wide outages or the client to start losing millions of dollars a minute because we didn't handle null correctly, right? Like now we get the opportunity to fix it up front. So null, we get into it, right? Nothing. Null is a keyword in C#, right? Null is short for null pointer. So a lot of other languages call it null pointer. So null reference exception is a null pointer exception. Assigning a value to null sets the value to a null pointer. So if you have a reference object and you set that reference object to null, you are really saying that this reference points or redirects to the null pointer or the null memory address. And returning the value of null is really just returning a reference to the null pointer. So it's not like every single object that you set equal to null actually becomes null. It's actually the other way around. Every object that you set equal to null now points to null, which is a minor distinction, but in my opinion, it was a very important mental model for me in order to understand how to take advantage of this feature. So now we get into things like value types, right? So value types have always had nullability, right? And value type, because I've had numerous conversations about reference types and value types, and for a long time, it just was headache music. But to distill it, it's basically just a fancy word for a primitive. Value types are things like integers, structs, enums, right? Like any numeric type, while it can be set to the null memory address, by default, it actually has a value. So an integer has a default value of 0, right? Like a struct would have a default value of whatever the struct is. So the value types already had this, and we already understood this for value types. So again, back to it. What does that mean? Well, really all we got was nullability support for reference types, right? So reference types are more sophisticated. You've probably heard people talk about passing arguments by reference versus passing them by value. Really what you're talking about is memory addresses, which is something that you don't know unless you get into like the IL or like the machine code. You won't really pay attention to that. But really what we're talking about is complex types, right? So I don't know a system that I've worked on in the last 20 years that hasn't had to create at least one complex type to house some data or to transport some data or to do some domain concern. So really that's what we're talking about. We're talking about nullability for these complex types. These complex types have to be instantiated, right? Just like you have var I equals 0, you have to have like type I equals new type, right? So you have to instantiate this thing or it will be null, which is different from the value type because as we just said, the integer is 0 by default. And the other thing about this, and this is not exactly accurate as it's on the slide, but I'll talk about it anyway, is properties are defaulted to null. So your value type properties will have values, but if you have a complex object that has properties that has complex objects and you're going several layers deep down an object graph, everything that you do not assign a value, everything that you do not instantiate will be defaulted to null. And this is actually probably the biggest like brain moment that I had during learning about all of this stuff, is that I always, in the back of my mind, for whatever reason, I always thought string was a value type. But in reality, string is a reference type, because by default, the string's default value is null, right? So if you just create a string, it's going to be null. It's not like you actually explicitly have to set something to string.empty, which is something that I had to remind myself as I was going through a lot of these exercises implementing this feature in my code bases. So, of course, that's the next logical thing, right? It's like, well, wait a minute, Rodney. Everything is a string. Everything defaults to null. You just told me that value objects have a default value. How is this possible? Okay, well, this is where it starts to get kind of weird, and I will tell you that I don't have great answers for it. But yes, everything does resolve down to a string when you get into like the IL and the bytes and the machine language. Like, yeah, everything's a string. So yes, everything was nullable. But prior to the C# nullable reference types were not type safe as it relates to null. So you didn't. So I'm sure that people have seen it like in C# proper. Like now you can set something to null by saying by giving it a type and giving it the question mark after the type. That is syntactic sugar around nullable of T. Nullable of T is really the meat and potatoes of the nullable reference type, because now what C# is allowing you to do is provide a type safe reference to the null memory address. And that really is the game changer. Like, that's really what this feature is about. That's why this feature was valuable, because now your generic T's understand whether or not they're nullable, whether or not they respect the null state. So this was a game changer for me, realizing this and coming to this understanding about what this feature provided. This is just this is one of my favorite jokes here. This is your production logs telling you that you are not good at writing software and paying attention to detail. Please pay attention to these. If you have this in your production logs, go find them, fix them, because they are literally just money you are throwing down the drain. And your business, while you go to them and you tell them, hey, I need to turn on C# nullable reference types, they'll look at you and say, oh, that's tech debt. Oh, that's not going to give us any money. The reality of it is that every null reference exception I've ever seen thrown in a production environment has cost somebody somewhere money that they did not expect to have to spend. So listen to your production logs, folks. So yeah, we'll get into, so the language support is the main thing that we're going to be talking about here in reference. Yeah, that is probably something I should put on a mug, right? So really what we're talking about from a language support perspective is the null state, which gives you access to nullability, which is basically just objects now have the ability to reference the null pointer. Null state is the state of an object, or sorry, the state of a given type that has the ability to be null. And a null reference is, like I said, is just a specific allocation that the compiler knows about. So like null has no type. So what the geniuses, and I mean that sincerely, the geniuses on the C# language team did was they gave null a type so that you could reference the null pointer in a type safe manner. And I know I'm like repeating myself, but I'm really digging in on that, because that's the important part of this whole thing, is understanding that now you have the ability to check for null in a type safe manner. I'll go ahead and tell you this. The default keyword is probably the worst addition to the whole null feature offering, because default became the new null. I don't know, like, if you guys look at as many code bases that I do. I look at code all the time, whether it's on GitHub or immediately cloning somebody's repository and pulling the code down locally so I can dig through it. Like, because I use a lot of open source software, I dig through pretty much everybody's software that I run into a schism with their API surface. I just download their code and go look at it. So I've seen default used a lot. And one of the newest, and I don't remember what version of C# it was introduced in, but one of the newest compile time warnings will tell you that you should use null instead of default. Well, that's because default really only works for value types, right? Again, a value type has a default value. Its integer is a 0, decimal is a 0, right? Like your struct is your struct, enum is a byte, which is 0. But reference types, like default, is just a disguise around null, right? It's that nefarious Snidely Whiplash guy sitting in the corner waiting for his time to come in and again kick your software over and make you look bad in front of your customers. So, like, because there's now support for it, you can take the power of null into your hands and deal with it in ways that you couldn't before. And now you don't have to disguise it with keywords that don't actually fit. Yeah. I'm going to get to that when I get to some of the code. But yeah, default is all sorts of incorrect for reference types, and it really is just a disguise around null that will cause problems for you when you don't need it to. Additional language support, right? We had some compiler inclusions. So I've actually probably said this on the public internet once or twice and have been pointed out for it. But I'm actually not a fan of some of these operators, but I understand what they are and why they're there. And I think that's the key, is understanding that you are actually using any of these operators, right? The null forgiving operator, the conditional operator, the null coalescing, and the coalescing assignment, right? Like, these are all operators that allow you to have a conversation with the compiler. So what does that mean? That means that you are telling the compiler, no, I understand that you have Roslyn behind you and you know the code better than I do because you are literally the authority on it. I understand all that, but I know better than you do in this instance, right? So when I use the null forgiving operator, I'm basically telling the compiler, you don't know that it's null. I know it's not going to be null. Do what I say. So there's a lot of power there, but with great power comes great responsibility, right? So now you're overriding the compiler and Roslyn's intelligence and stating, I've got this. I know better than you do. So I'm not a fan of these operators, because now this is code that you have to maintain that doesn't actually add any business value. It's not actually even logic, right? Except for maybe like the coalescing assignment is probably logic. And so is the coalescence, but people use it in an odd way. And the reason why it's odd is because you're having a conversation with the compiler in the middle of your client's software. So you are talking to Roslyn in the middle of business logic. And in my opinion, that is an encapsulation break. Uncle Ben knows better. Yeah. That the jokes are good. You are basically leaving yourself technical debt that doesn't add any revenue to the person you're writing the software for. And what's worse is, because these are operators and they're just syntactic sugar, not everybody understands them. So people misuse them. People just kind of throw them around everywhere and then further don't encapsulate. Case in point, I've seen the null coalescing operator used all over a code base for a return value of a method that was returning a list. And it could have just returned a list, but instead it returned a nullable list. So that means everywhere in the code base, we now have to check for the nullability of this list. So now, how many places in the code base do you check? Now you got 20, 30 different places where you're doing this operation, and it's not even real logic. You're just having a conversation with the compiler. So I'm not a fan of these. Again, they have value, but I feel like you should use them sparingly. I will tell you that there's really very few places where I think you should ever use the null forgiving operator. And the operator that I see overused the most is the null condition, or the conditional operator. When you turn on C# nullability, the feature, you will immediately see all the places that question mark dot is used incorrectly, because the thing that it's checking actually can't even be null. But people put it all throughout the code base just in case it's null, right? Because everyone's worried about these dreaded null reference exceptions, but no one's really doing the work to ensure that they remove them from their code base completely. So that gets in. So that kind of concludes like what the language feature is, what the language support is, and we're gonna kind of dig into like, what do I do now, like based upon all of this information that I've learned. These days, I actually default values for reference types. So I actually create my own defaults. And actually, the last time I gave this talk spawned an entire, and you can find it on my YouTube. It spawned an entire couple of days of me hacking at some source generators to create default values for reference types. So that way, I'm not using the default keyword. I'm constructing a proper default, and I don't have to rely on null all throughout my code base. So like, here's the key, right? If you are returning null from a method or returning null from a property, and that property or method is public, you are basically forcing every consumer to verify the null state of that property or method every time they consume it. So we really should be trying, as good software engineers and good stewards of our code bases, we should be trying to encapsulate those concerns and ensure that, hey, it's okay to check null and return null from private methods in a class, but maybe we shouldn't do it for protected methods that are virtual or methods that are public, because now we are forcing our consumers to use it. And I use that term, like I've maintained some open source libraries, like I've contributed some open source libraries. So when I say that, it sounds like a library concern, right? Oh, Rodney, you're talking about public APIs, and that only matters when you're doing framework development, or if you're doing like web API development, stuff like that. Well, yes. And what you don't realize is your system has boundaries, right? You have domain objects, view models, you have controllers, you have all of these boundaries in your software. And anytime you force null across one of those boundaries, right, you're causing this problem. Even another thing a lot of people don't think about, we talk about like, I'll get into solid for a second, right? Like we talk about Liskov substitution principle. Well, the whole concept of that principle is you can use the same objects across different subsystems, right? So now think of the communication from one subsystem to another, i.e. your data layer to your domain layer, or your view model layer, or your controller, or your mediator layer, whatever the case may be. Really what you're doing at that point is you're forcing everyone to check. And it becomes very, very difficult in scenarios where people may not want to check or may require that thing to be there. So pay attention, because it really does matter when you get into some of the higher level software offerings. For my own projects, sometimes it doesn't matter, because, if a bug happens, it's not the end of the world, right? But some folks I know work in medical, and you don't want medical software throwing a system null reference exception while it's hooked up to somebody's pacemaker, and their pacemaker, falls over. That's kind of bad, right? So paying attention matters. In my opinion, there is no reason ever, especially with I think C# 13, 14. I think it might be. It's one of the newest C#. There's collection expressions now, right? Like there's no reason why you should ever return a null list. Now you can return a list of nullable objects, but returning a null list, in my opinion, is just pointless. Use any of these options in front of you, right? Like you have enumerable empty, array empty, collection initializers, like don't return null, because a lot of us use IEnumerable return values to do method chaining. So now what you're doing is you're forcing every method that chains off of that return value to check whether or not it has a value, and then it has to return a list. So if I go to a repository and there are no DTOs that satisfy my query, instead of returning a null list, I should just return an empty list, right? That's a really big one. And in my opinion, that's one of those things that will immediately make your software better. But like I say, take everything I say with a grain of salt, because I'm just one developer that's only seen the things that I've seen. If a property does not have a value at construction, it's nullable. So try not to force consumers to do all the property checking on null. Again, null checks all over your code base. Yes, I get it. It's easy to do. It's only an extra character, but go check your code base tomorrow, next week, and just do a Control-Shift-F and look for $.dot in your code base and tell me how many of them are there. It might scare you. When I did this on one code base, I found well over thousands of them. And again, this is not code that has any real production value. All it's doing is masking over the fact that we didn't want to properly encapsulate null. Yeah, it kind of is what it is. Public immutability actually helps enforce the state design pattern. So this is a big thing. Like I had a conversation with somebody on the internet the other day. They were asking about, when did object initialization become the thing? And I was like, hey, object initialization became a thing kind of around the entity framework time frame. Everyone started using object initialization. But what it did was it changed everyone's mindset from using constructors to using object initialization, which means now we have all of these publicly mutable things. When we talk about publicly mutable, that means any public consumer can assign a value to this property on an object and mutate its state. Well, if you are able to encapsulate that mutation and not make things publicly mutable, you can enforce your state design pattern and make sure that somebody else, like some other developer, isn't looking at it later and makes some nefarious change, or it maybe makes a change and doesn't realize it. And now you've got an entire property that gets set to null randomly, right? Because if you allow it to be publicly settable, any developer can set that property to null anytime they want and cause more null reference exceptions. So do yourself a favor and pay attention to your publicly mutable properties, and you will probably not thank me for it ever, but it's good for you. Trust me. Methods should always return relevant information. Task is a completion. It shouldn't return null. Void is a place where things go and never come back. It's literally the abyss, right? Because we don't get a completion notification. We know that the method completes because the execution process continues, but we don't know that it actually completed or how it completed, like we do with a task, right? You can inspect a task and see whether or not it has an exception, whether or not it faulted, all of those things. But again, null is the absence of a thing, which means we shouldn't really be returning things from methods. Thank you, Lester. Task.completed task exists for a reason, right? Explicitly so that you don't use a nullable task, right? Because if you're doing nullable task, you're basically just creating an even worse void, and you're going to, one day someone's going to hit something on the wrong thread and your application is going to fall over and somebody's going to have to fix it. Another thing that I'm going to talk about is optionals or defaults. I think I said this the last time I gave this talk, but I'm going to say it here and probably get yelled at before. While I am grateful to the C# team for giving us nullable of T, I think optional of T would have probably been a better long-term healthy option for for the C# framework. Why is that? Because by default, the optional implementation gives you a default. So you can do like optional T.none and it will give you something that is not null, thereby making null less of a thing. So the C# reference types makes null a first-class citizen. Optional would have made null something that we actually don't really want and more explicit in our code to spot. But again, is what it is. It's up to you, the developer, to figure out how your system needs to work. So you make the decisions on what you want. Roslyn supports, like I said earlier, conversations. You can use operators. You can use warnings. There are warnings that are happening when you don't comply with these nullability rules. And you can actually force MS Build you can force .NET, which is MS Build under the hood, to fail compilation if your null checks don't work out, right? And that's the biggest, in my opinion, benefit to turning on C# nullable reference types is you can literally stop a developer from even exercising the code until they fix a potential null reference exception. So now, instead of waiting for that skulking shadow in the corner to come in and kick your application over, the compiler will keep your developers from even creating those instances, which is heaven sent, in my opinion. So there are different ways that you can implement compile time error checking. You can use ReSharper, you can use editor config, or you can use a Roslyn config file. And we'll look at some of those options in a little bit. I say this these days because now I'm a Xamarin developer, MAUI developer by day. So I didn't have access for years and years to some of the nicer C# features, but now that I have it, I use records, because records allow me to enforce that immutability concern a little bit better. But for data transfer objects, I no longer use classes, I use records. If I do use classes, I use object initialization with the init keyword, or I just do object construction. And I use JSON converters to project null value. So I'm one of those guys that uses strongly typed domain reference IDs. So I write JSON converters that will convert my JSON to a proper null thing. So instead of it just being a nullable int, if my ID is of type integer, it will actually be a null reference to that type of integer. So it becomes very powerful for you, a tool for you to use. Pardon me. Yes, records make immutability cool. Records are the new jazz. You should use them. I'll tell you a lot. I've used them. I think my first introduction to them was F#. I was doing some F# and I got introduced to them and I was like, wait, this is great. Why don't we have this? And then like 2 weeks later, C# had it and I was like, yay. But I couldn't use it because I was a Xamarin developer at the time. Boo. But now I'm a MAUI developer. Yay, I can use it. Anyway, creating your own reference objects in the domain. Like I said, provide properties that are provided from the application are good candidates for null. If a property is mutable, if you can mutate a property publicly, it's technically null, because someone will come along and set it equal to null. They'll see the warning and they'll hit their alt enter and they'll change the property at the source and it'll become nullable and the world will fall over, right? And you'll have to catch it on a pull request review and it gets really, really hairy and somebody will probably get mad when they have to explain why we don't do that. So just don't do it. And again, be aware that when you're using value types as null and value type nullability. Like the main thing that I see these days is people using nullable Boolean as like the new 3-state enum. It's probably not the best, but it is what it is. So like I told you earlier, you have the concept of optionality. There are several libraries that I consume that use this thing or have an implementation of this thing. I've seen several developers create their own. As a matter of fact, there was a gentleman that did a talk that actually wrote a source generator to build his own optionals, which again, fantastic. So this gives you the ability to deal with the default. Remember earlier where I said, oh, I create my own defaults? Well, if I'm using a library that has an optional T, I don't have to create my own defaults. I can use optional. Optional is a functional concept, and there's no default language support for it, but there are plenty of implementations out there. You can either go grab one from a library that uses it. Two libraries that I can tell you off the top of my head are Dynamic Data and C# language extensions. They both have an optional T implementation. You can either go copy and paste theirs and properly attribute it in your code, meaning, put a permalink to where you stole it from GitHub and do that if you don't want to take a full dependency on the library, right? Or you can take a dependency on the library. In my opinion, either one of those libraries is going to give you way more than just optional. So if you're not going full functional, I wouldn't bother with it, but again, it's an option. You can get fancy and guard against null, right? Like you can do, there's I think Ardalis has a guard clauses library. You can use fluent validation. There are different ways, right? You can use the newer C# language version has a static off of argument null exception that will throw if the argument is null, right? Like you need something that lets you describe the behaviors of your system, something that lets you describe the behavior of a thing, right? And it should be strongly typed so that you can use checking against the null state. And that's the jazz, right? Like that's what you're looking for, is contract-based development, right? Because like now you can set your public contract for your domain object, and whatever nullability it has, it's the contract that people have to deal with. So now instead of having argument null exception be thrown, you can look at the public API surface and determine what should be nullable and what's not. Yeah, so like let's look at some code. If you can bring me over to the code. There we go. So oh, this is not good. Let me clean some of this up and move some things around so that I can see on my side. All right. Yeah, that's big enough. So this is a sample application that I built for a completely separate talk, but I have nullability turned on and it will get me what I need to get through this conversation. So one thing that I will point out, let me close all but pinned. One thing that I will point out is that I am using central package management. While that is not the focus of the talk, I will tell you that if you are not using central package management, you are likely doing it wrong. I have been using this particular feature for the past 6-7 years, and it has not led me astray. So what it does is it allows me to define everything here locally or in a single file, all my versions. So anything that I have across assembly will automatically get the same version when I include the NuGet package. The only reason why I bring it up is because I have props files that are created as a result of this. And this is where I enable my nullability, right? So this right here is the enablement of the feature itself, right? This right here is literally it. After this, you've got full access to everything. So if I do a Control-Shift-Find, then I look for ? Dot. Do I have that anywhere in the code base? Yeah, let's go there. Let's go find this. So you'll notice here that my view model is actually, it's going to take me into ReactiveUI. Perfect. So what you'll see here is that my view model on my page is actually nullable. Well, why is that? Because it's publicly settable and anybody can set it to null anytime they want. And if we don't, at the library perspective, that means that anyone that's consuming it that has C# nullability turned on can't really get access to the null state of this thing. So what this allows me to do is now if I don't, let me see. Yeah, perfect. So now you'll notice right here in my IDE, I have this thing that tells me, and I'll collapse these solution bits so you can see it. Maybe if I can click buttons. I don't think, oh, it's weird. Oh, there we go. You'll see right here that it tells me that I have, it wants me to use conditional access or suppress with the bang operator. I'll tell you right now that this should just go away and never come back, because adding this all over your code base is probably the worst thing you can do. It defeats the entire purpose of turning on this feature, because now what this thing is saying is the compiler, Roslyn, knows that it is, that the dispose with method is trying to access something that is potentially null, and it's telling me this at compile time. So this is literally what a system null reference exception looks like with C# nullable reference types turned on, right? No longer is it some nefarious log message in your logs or some shadow that's going to come in and kick your software over. It is now something in your face that the developer has to deal with. Oh, you guys can't see the context menu because I'm sharing just my Rider window. So the context menu shows use conditional access and suppress null warnings. So taking the first one adds back the question mark. Let me Control Z, and adding this, or choosing the second one, adds the bang operator, right? Neither one of those are actually really what I want. So what this now allows me to do is, I have this compiler warning CS8602. So let's do this, CS8602. Oh, it's not anywhere. So great, we can do it live. And I don't know where it's going to end up. So let's go find the editor config for the entirety of the project. Oh, I still can't click buttons. Still not great at this button clicking business. Here we go. Here's an editor config file. Yeah, let's pin that. So in my editor config, I can do different .NET styling and .NET concerns. I think I also have an actual Roslyn. Yeah, I have a style cop file, and I think I have a Roslyn file in here as well as some resharper bits. But what overall this should allow me to do, and I'm going to see if it works at this point. What this should allow me to do is take this compiler warning, and I want to disable it. I want to take it, and I want to, yeah, I'll do it just so that you can see it, right? So you can watch it happen, right? So, woo. Clearly my IDE is not happy with what I just did. I think it's frozen. Here we go. Did it not put the, it didn't, it's not doing it. Okay, so let's go figure that out. Oh, it did do it. It's just weird. Okay, so what you can do to short circuit for time, because I know we're coming up on it, you can add the concerns directly here, or you can add them into your props file, and that's not the right props file, Rodney. Change this. You can add, I think it's warnings as errors here, and I can set, I think it was CS8602, maybe. We're gonna test my memory today. And now, if I am good at what I do, that thing that was a compilation, come on, it's gonna let me do it. It's gonna figure itself out. It's not gonna figure itself out. Let me go find something else that actually has nullability. Oh, there we go. So why is this? Okay, well, what that's supposed to do, and it's not doing, live demonstrations, right? What that's supposed to do is make this a warning, but I don't think I got the number right. Oh, I didn't. CS8631 too as well. Okay, so let's come back here to our directory props, and I think it's comma based. CS8631, was it? You have to excuse me. My my oh so fast computer is taking time to input the values that I put in from the keyboard seconds ago. So There we go. Okay, now the IDE figured itself out. Okay, so now if I go back here to my screen base, I should see this. Nope, it still doesn't have it right. Okay, well, I clearly have to figure out why that's not working. It's likely something smart that I did with the editor, having editor config, style cop, and everything in there. But the reason why I bring this up is because this is the value of the feature right here, is turning on nullability everywhere and explicitly setting warnings as errors for the nullable reference type exceptions that you care or configuration that you care about. Some of them are less important than others. Some of them are more important than others. There's other ways to turn on nullability. You can turn it on at the assembly level. So I can turn it on in my props file, which will hit all of my assemblies. I can turn it on in the in my CS project, which will turn it on for just that project assembly, or I can turn it on for a specific file in the assembly. So it gives me that option to slowly introduce nullability versus doing it big bang. Ooh, that is a spicy question. I'm gonna finish my thought and I'm gonna come back to that question. What this gives you the ability to do is to turn it on assembly by assembly. So I personally would recommend doing it at the edges of your applications, i.e., don't go into work tomorrow and turn on nullability in the middle of your domain and see what breaks. You will probably cry and have to have a drink after work. I did the first time I did it. I was like, oh my God, this is overwhelming. There's thousands upon thousands of errors. I'm never going to be able to tackle this, right? So what I did was I started at the seams of my application, the UI layer. So in the MAUI world, there are certain C# pieces that might have nullability concerns. The view model layer, you could do that. The data layer is a great place to do it, right? Because we all know that you can take a piece of JSON and that JSON could, the property could exist or not exist, which would denote null, or the value in the property could be null, and you actually have to handle that in your data transfer layer, right? So I would recommend starting at the seams of your application and start small, understand what the feature has available to you, what the different warning types are telling you, which warnings you want to add. I thought, and if I thought I did, but I guess I don't. I thought I had a link in the slide deck to the documentation. There's documentation out there that will tell you all of the available warnings directly on Microsoft's site. You can go out there and look directly at the documentation, pull it up, and see all of the C# errors that exist. So I would recommend you taking it slow and doing it at a good pace and understanding what these changes actually mean for your code base, rather than just turning it on, saying you did the thing, and realizing all of the fallout from it, because it's going to be a massive change to the way, one, you write code, two, the way you maintain code, the way you read it, the way you comprehend the nullability and the null state of the objects in your system. So that's kind of the end of what that looks like. I just kind of like to show how to turn it on, specifically this bit about turning on warnings as errors, because you in my opinion, this is just my opinion, compile time errors that force developers to fix problems are 10 times better than warnings that they get to ignore. I am very big into shifting left, and you can't shift any further left than forcing a developer to fix a null reference exception while they're writing their code. So that's kind of the end of that. There was a question from Lester, and he's asking, there we go, perfect. So the question is there hope for C# ever becoming a truly null-safe language like Kotlin or F# in a way that's enforced by the compiler by default? So I said earlier in the talk that the people that do this are geniuses. The C# language team, smarter individuals than I am. I don't know. I can say that the reason why I made the statement about optional versus nullability is because I want the ability. Let me see actually if I have an example of optional. I wanted the ability. Yeah, here we go. I wanted the ability to force developers to not use null and to explicitly use this optional type, which I think this one is from dynamic data. We're about to find out in a second if my decompiler works. Go gadget decompiler. So I think that if we had gone the optional route, it would be a more likely scenario, but because of backwards compatibility and C#'s stance on not breaking, I think it's like .NET 4.8 for everybody that either can't or just won't upgrade to the newest version of the framework because they can't introduce that breaking change. I don't think we'll ever get there because it is a breaking change. So if we can ever get around that breaking change, I think we open up the opportunity for the conversation. But until we get past that breaking change, I think we're stuck with null. But again, the good thing about this language feature is now it is a compile time concern that you can look at and deal with rather than something that only shows up in your production logs. So I hope it gets there. And I actually had a conversation with Mads Torgerson about that, asking him, hey, is it possible? And he kind of gave me the same answer of, yes, it's possible, but a lot of time and effort, and it's a question of whether or not the juice is worth the squeeze for the Microsoft team, in all honesty. Great question. Anybody else? Any other questions? Any other thoughts? I guess not. The crickets say no. So I will stop sharing my screen here. Oh, it finally got to the decompiler. Okay, here is an implementation of optional, and I believe, this is out of dynamic data. Yep, perfect. So this gives you an understanding of the difference between nullable T and option T is that in this instance, T cannot be null, which we don't want it to be null, which is very, very important in that space. So now I'll stop presenting. And if there are no questions, thank you for your time and your attention. Hopefully you were able to get some value out of this talk. If you have any further questions, you think about something later, or if you even just need help looking at enabling this feature, feel free to hit me up. Let me know. We can schedule some time. I can give you some ideas and some thoughts, and I can show you, kind of how to enable this feature. I explicitly didn't do a how to enable the feature talk because in my opinion, it's really simple to enable it. The hard part is understanding the why the Roslyn compiler is now telling me all of this new information.
That is correct. Yeah, enabling the feature is just, you can do it by file, you can do it by module, you can do it the whole project. The documentation can guide you on that matter. But understanding what actually means the IDE when there is a null, also the fact that I started doing that treating warnings as error. I know that some folks just, you see that in the Visual Studio, you have the option to never see the warning. I know a lot of folks that they never see the warnings, but the warning means something that can become an error in runtime. So watch out your warnings.
Well, specifically with these nullable reference type warnings, they are runtime exceptions, no question. Like it's not something that might be. It's a runtime exception. Someone's going to hit your edge case, and your system's going to blow up. So if there's an argument for shifting left, that's the best argument for shifting left that I can find.
Yeah.
Make the developers deal with it while they're writing the code, so you don't have to deal with it in your production logs.
Yeah. Also, the advice for immutability on the public properties, that's something that I'm been trying to enforce, especially using records and so on. But also, C# has brought a new set of collections that are meant for that. Actually, I'm thinking about a presentation just to talk about immutability on .NET. It can be a continuation of this one. So folks, be ready. I'm gonna be preparing that presentation for the next month, not in May, but next month in the future. Ronnie, I enjoy the presentation. I really, really enjoy your presentation. I told you I had the opportunity, folks, to work with Rodney. So having this person as part of my co-workers was one of the my favorite part of my whole developer experience. And the good thing is that he has this nice way of teaching. So if you don't learn talking or learning from him, you might not learn from anyone. So
Oh man, I appreciate the kind words, Andres. As always, I'm grateful to be in your presence, friend. You've always been a light in my open source career, and like you say, I love to teach because I'm always that person who's always learning and trying to find and figure out new things. And I've got friends that are smarter than me, that are deeper than me into the .NET ecosystem, and they help me understand these things. So, I really believe in each one teach one, and it's not just a slogan for me. Like people in the community will tell you, like, I will stop what I'm doing. I will download your code. I will verify that if your bug is still there. Like,
yeah,
I don't mind helping because I have been helped so much by so many individuals. And Lester, thank you for your feedback on the talk. Yeah, man, there's so many people that I've had the opportunity, specifically in the Dominican community, to work with and show them different things that I've learned and get their feedback on the things that I've learned. And the things that I think, right. And I get, sometimes they're like, Rodney, that's ridiculous. Like, why would you ever do this? And I learned something like, hey, maybe I shouldn't do it that way. Right. But I'm always open to dialogue because I've learned that I am never the smartest person in the room. And I can always learn from the junior in the room, whether I think I can or not. And I feel like a lot of us as software engineers, as we get 10, 15, 20 years under our belt, we are really dismissive of the juniors in the room. And
yeah.
I can tell you flat out that some of the juniors in the room have the best ideas, and you will never hear them because you don't have a culture of listening and learning.
Yeah.
So we try and instill that culture of listening and learning. And that's just what it is, man. So I'm always grateful for the opportunity to get in front of a group of people and talk about .NET.
And you have been around the minicamps different times in your career. I don't know at this point how you don't know. How do you speak Spanish?
Look, that's a sore spot between me and Charlene. She's actually very mad at me for not having learned Spanish by this point. So it's funny. The last time I was in the Dominican, I was standing at a bar ordering a drink, and the Dominican behind the bar that was serving me started yelling at me in Spanish and calling me a traitor because I wasn't speaking my native language. And I didn't understand him. So somebody else had to explain, like, he doesn't speak Spanish. He's not Dominican. Like, so look, it's 2025. I don't have much more time on we'll get started on Spanish. How's that sound? We'll fire up Duolingo, and hopefully sometime in the next 5 years, I can do a talk in Spanish.
We're looking forward for that. Well, no, we're not gonna wait 5 years to invite you again. We might be inviting you in English. People are gonna enjoy anyways. And if you people listening, if you had trouble like understanding, I bet you probably didn't, but in case you did, there's questions, come to me and I be more than happy to clear out any doubts regarding the presentation. Ronnie, I don't want to use more of your time. You're being so kind to be with us with 1 hour and 50 minutes. I really appreciate from the .NET community and the whole Dominican Republic .NET community. We appreciate you giving us of your time to learn this very interesting topic.
Anytime, any topic. I'm always happy to help.
Appreciate that. And that's something I love about you. Always willing to help. So Fox, hope you did enjoy. It was a great presentation. It was a great speaker. It is a great time. It's holiday. Well, the holiday's off tomorrow. So you're gonna have most of you or all of you are gonna be off from work. So take the opportunity to go back to the slide, go back to the recording. I just shared a link of a previous presentation from almost 3 years ago, where we were talking about optionals, like how to do the implementation of optionals in the C# code. Go and watch your presentation as well. Watch them all together and be ready for the next for another presentation that we're going to be doing about immutability on .NET. My name is Andres. We had Ronnie as a guest. Hope you all had a great evening and have a nice Easter. See you later.